In 1976, record labels controlled a $4 billion recording industry through expensive studio contracts. Then, a Polaroid engineer spending $49 on furnace foam turned his basement into a recording studio and exposed their biggest lie. This is how one MIT graduate's $30,000 investment cost the music industry over $200 million in studio revenue and changed recording forever. While other musicians dreamed of expensive studios, Tom Scholz was building circuits. In 1969, as his generation gathered at Woodstock, he was graduating from MIT with a master's degree in mechanical engineering. His first job at Polaroid paid $25,000 annually. Modest money compared to professional studio budgets, but enough to fund his real obsession, proving that great records didn't require massive spending. At Polaroid, Scholz worked on their instant movie system, where milliseconds of audio synchronization error could ruin an entire project. This obsession with technical perfection would soon transform the music industry. But his real innovations happened after hours, in a basement studio that would threaten the recording industry's entire business model. Scholz invested his life savings, $30,000, to build a recording setup next to his furnace. While professional studios charged $120 per hour, pushing most bands into $100,000 debt before their first album, Scholz was developing a better way. He modified every piece of equipment himself, creating devices that didn't exist anywhere else. The heart of his system was a Scully 284 tape machine, rebuilt with custom electronics designed during Polaroid lunch breaks. For guitar sounds, he built the Boston Strangler, a load box capturing cranked Marshall amp tone at whisper volumes. Each innovation solved problems that professional studios spent fortunes trying to fix. Between 71 and 75, Scholz recorded over 60 songs in that basement. Working with local bands, he perfected a recording technique using multiple guitar layers, each track pitched slightly differently, creating a sound no professional studio had achieved. Record labels kept rejecting his demos, claiming they weren't professionally recorded. Their executives, sitting in offices costing more monthly than Scholz's entire studio, couldn't understand how these polished recordings came from a basement. Working with singer Brad Delp, who shared his perfectionist streak, Scholz crafted 6 songs that would expose the industry's biggest lie. He recorded almost every instrument himself, meticulously layering tracks until the sound matched his vision. While other bands rushed through expensive studio time to meet label deadlines, Scholz could spend a month perfecting a single guitar solo, all without watching a studio clock tick away money. The record industry was about to learn an expensive lesson. Sometimes, the best innovations come from engineers who question the system, not studios charging whatever they want. And Tom Scholz was about to prove that technical genius could beat deep pockets every time. Record labels had a formula: book an expensive studio, hire veteran producers, spend whatever it takes. But in 1976, Epic Records heard something that shattered their assumptions. The demo tape sounded too polished, too perfect. This couldn't be from someone's basement. But it was. While professional studios wasted millions on mixing consoles, Scholz had built something revolutionary for $30,000. His guitar rig, powered by the infamous Boston Strangler load box, achieved the impossible: arena-sized tone at apartment volumes. Every piece of gear had been modified or completely rebuilt using knowledge from his Polaroid engineering days. Professional studios depended on their high-end consoles. Sound City's Neve 8028 cost $500,000, Electric Lady's custom desk even more. But Scholz studied circuit design at MIT, learning that expensive equipment often used simple electronics marked up thousands of dollars. His basement studio centered on a used Scully 284 tape machine bought for $7,000. He spent nights rewiring its electronics, improving its frequency response beyond what even the most expensive recorders could achieve. His most revolutionary device cost just $49 to build. While studios spent thousands soundproofing rooms for loud guitar amplifiers, Scholz created the Boston Strangler, a load box built from a theatrical light's heatsink. It let him capture his Marshall amp's distinctive sound at whisper volumes. Professional engineers insisted such recording techniques were impossible. Scholz proved them wrong by recording after midnight, perfecting guitar tracks while his neighbors slept undisturbed. Each innovation solved specific problems. Studios used expensive outboard gear, like the Eventide harmonizer, to create effects. Scholz built his own pitch-shifting circuits during lunch breaks at Polaroid. His custom preamps, modified EQ units, and innovative signal processors achieved sounds that engineers claimed required tens of thousands in studio equipment. Every piece of gear in his signal chain had been engineered to capture exactly what he heard in his head. By the time Epic realized what was happening, it was too late. The album was nearly finished, and it sounded incredible. Scholz had proved that technical innovation could beat deep pockets. His $30,000 basement studio had outperformed facilities costing millions. The formula that record labels had relied on for decades was about to be exposed as an expensive lie. August 25, 1976. While Epic Records celebrated Boston's album release, their accountants faced a troubling reality. The label had spent over $200,000 maintaining the illusion of professional studio recording. But that deception would soon seem trivial compared to the industry-wide collapse their success would trigger. The numbers hit like an earthquake. Within 2 months of release, Boston achieved gold status. By November, platinum. 2 months later, sales passed 2 million. December 77 saw 6 million units across every format: records, 8-tracks, cassettes. The success exposed a painful truth. Bands didn't need expensive studios to make hit records. The impact devastated professional studios first. Sound City Studios in Los Angeles had just spent $2 million upgrading their recording console. Electric Lady in New York had invested $1.5 million in new equipment. Their investments became anchors as bands began demanding Scholz rates. Flat-fee deals instead of hourly charges. Studios that once commanded $200 per hour now struggled to get $50. By mid-77, 3 major Los Angeles facilities had filed for bankruptcy. Record labels scrambled to adapt. Warner Brothers created a demo development program, offering bands pre-production budgets for home recording. Atlantic Records started hiring technically skilled producers over traditional hit makers. CBS Records even approached Scholz about consulting on a new artist engineering program, though he declined. Scholz struck back at the industry in 1978, founding Scholz Research and Development to turn his technical innovations into commercial products. His first release, the Power Soak Attenuator, a refined version of his Boston Strangler load box, sold 20,000 units at $90 each. The Rockman amplifier followed in 1982, eventually generating over $12 million in revenue. Major studios watched their business model collapse. Sunset Sound began selling off excess equipment. Record Plant's legendary Studio C, where Stevie Wonder had recorded Songs in the Key of Life, sat empty most weeks. By 1980, you could buy a $200,000 mixing console for pennies on the dollar. The very equipment meant to maintain studios' dominance now flooded the market at fire sale prices. Epic Records faced their own crisis. Their contract required Boston to deliver 10 albums over 6 years. But Scholz refused to rush his recording process, understanding that technical precision mattered more than release schedules. Label executives, used to bands churning out annual releases, couldn't grasp why their biggest new act insisted on spending months perfecting single guitar tracks. Their formula, get bands in expensive studios, use professional producers, release on schedule, was being challenged by an engineer who valued perfection over tradition. The truth about Boston's recording methods spread through the industry like wildfire. Engineers at professional studios started studying Scholz's techniques, trying to understand how he'd achieved such massive sounds in a basement. His guitar layering approach, once dismissed as impossible outside major studios, became the new standard. The industry that had rejected his demos was now desperately trying to copy his methods. By 1985, the landscape had changed forever. Professional studios still existed, but their role had fundamentally shifted. Instead of booking months of expensive time, artists arrived with nearly completed recordings, needing only final mixing. Record labels rewrote their contracts, replacing studio budgets with production allowances that let artists build their own recording spaces. The industry that had laughed at Scholz's basement tapes now watched as home recording technology generated more revenue than studio booking fees ever had. Scholz's success triggered an avalanche that would bury the old recording industry. Queen's guitarist Brian May, who held a PhD in astrophysics, converted his entire home into a recording space. Using modified equipment similar to Scholz's designs, Queen recorded their 1977 album News of the World for less than $50,000, a quarter of typical studio costs. It sold over 4 million copies, proving Boston's success wasn't a fluke. The transformation spread rapidly. Alan Parsons, the engineer who'd worked on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, abandoned expensive studios entirely. His Alan Parsons project recorded in converted spaces using modified equipment, proving Scholz's methods could work for any genre. Even Neil Young, who'd spent millions recording at professional studios, built a home facility on his ranch. By 1985, Scholz Research and Development was generating more revenue than most professional studios, with 40,000 Rockman units sold at $300 each. Each device represented another artist freed from expensive studio contracts. His 19 patents didn't just make him wealthy, they systematically dismantled the recording industry's control over artists. Major manufacturers scrambled to serve this new market. MCI, which had built $100,000 recording consoles, released the Model 500, a $4,000 home recording console. Ampex, whose professional tape machines cost upwards of $50,000, introduced the MM1000 home studio recorder for under $5,000. Every company that once served professional studios now chased the market Scholz had created. Professional studios faced extinction. Record Plant went from charging $200 per hour to offering flat-rate mixing packages. Electric Lady Studios adapted by focusing on hip-hop production, where studio acoustics still mattered for vocal recording. Others weren't so fortunate. 27 major studios closed between 1980 and 1985, their million-dollar consoles selling at auction for pennies on the dollar. The transformation reached every corner of the industry. Guitar manufacturers added recording outputs to their instruments. Microphone companies developed affordable condensers. Effects pedal makers advertised studio quality at home. Companies like Tascam and Fostex built empires selling home recording equipment, generating over $100 million annually by 1985, dwarfing traditional studio booking fees. Record companies faced this new reality with growing alarm. Their standard contracts in 1976 had allocated $200,000 for studio time. By 1985, that same money went to production budgets, letting artists build home studios instead. Some labels tried enforcing professional studio requirements, but artists simply pointed to Boston's 17 million albums as proof that home recording worked. Even the architecture of music changed. Studio designers who once built multi-million-dollar facilities now specialized in converting residential spaces. Real estate agents developed expertise in recording-friendly properties, understanding that musicians now needed homes that could accommodate studio spaces. The industry that once required massive facilities now fit into spare bedrooms and basements. Scholz proved that technical innovation could overcome any industry obstacle. His basement recordings didn't just challenge the system, they systematically dismantled it. The MIT graduate showed that sometimes the best solutions don't come from throwing money at a problem. They come from someone smart enough to question why things cost so much in the first place.